Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Ryan Lencloss, and welcome to the Esri Emergency Management webinar series today. Today, we're talking about, are you WebGIS ready for the next disaster? So with me today, I've got Jeff Barani. Jeff Barani is our Public Safety Assistance Program Operations Manager. Many of you know us as the Esri Disaster Response Program. And what we'd like to talk about today are a couple of steps for you. Number one, we want to make sure you kind of know what this concept of WebGIS is, introduce some of you that may be new to that concept, and really just kind of lay a foundation for you as you move forward and become WebGIS ready. And what does WebGIS ready mean? So we're going to leave you with kind of 4 steps here. One is, how do you collect and connect to your data to become WebGIS ready? How do you enable and manage mobile workforce, field crews, and staff that are out in the field? Doing mobile workflows so that they're ready to take advantage of WebGIS. How do you pick the right apps for the workflow that is at hand? So many of you service large organizations or even small organizations with many requests for GIS data and applications. So we're going to help you with a pick list of applications and understand how to choose the right one for the workflow. And then finally, we're going to give you a little bit of configuration guidance as you look at these mission critical apps, so to make sure that these applications can scale, that they can stand up to the load, and they can service those workflows that you have during times of crisis and disaster. And of course, we'll do question and answer along the way as we go forward, and then at the end, have some dedicated time to answer any of your questions that come up today. So a little bit of housekeeping here as we get started. So all of you are on mute today. If you have any questions, please just use the chat window to ask your questions. We'll try to answer as many as we can along the way today. If we don't happen to get to your question today, given the time that we have, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly after today's webinar. So again, just use the chat windows as you go throughout the webinar today. We're also going to have kind of 3 interactive poll questions, and these poll questions are your chance to kind of give us a bit of feedback as we go through today's webinar. So we're going to ask you a series of questions that help us tailor the message a bit to the audience we have on board today, and learn from you as well, kind of where you are in the process of WebGIS, and how we might be able to support you better as we leave today's webinar. Finally, after today, this recording will be posted online, so you'll get an email link with resources that we're going to describe today, as well as a link to the recording to reference back. And you can always find those recordings not only from today's webinar, but across all of our public safety webinar series posted online at esri.com under the public safety industry. So with that, let's get started. And really just to set a little bit of context here, I would like to ask you a question right up front. So we're going to start our first poll question today. And what I'm looking for those of you on the phone, I'm really interested to know how many events or activations that you've supported in the last year. For us at Esri, it's been a really hectic year with a number of disasters. And so just kind of curious your expertise and level of comfort with activating at some level, whether it's a really small special event or it's a full-blown disaster all hands on deck event. So just take that in context. If you would, just please select one on the screen. None, all the way up to more than 10 events if you've been extremely busy or activated in supporting your emergency management public safety mission inside of your organization. So please take a moment to select one that's most appropriate. All right, so let's take a look at the results from the poll here. All right, so 31% are none. So that's actually a good place for you to be today. So for those, when you get called off the bench and you're put into the game, you're sitting there in the EOC and the activation, we hope that today's tips and tricks will get you up to running much more quickly, and then also support your ability to scale when the disaster does hit. And then I find it really interesting, about 60% are in the 1 to 2 to 3 to 5. So that's a really interesting number for me to see. I think that tells us a lot about where you are and that you've been in the hot seat, so to speak, a couple of times, either as a GIS practitioner or as a emergency management operator or official on that side. And then for those of you that are more than 10, I feel your pain. So that's 6%. So we're with you, and I'm curious to learn more from you as we go forward. So I would love to hear from you about those events that you've supported this year, and just learn a bit more after this. So, we'll give you some contact information. Just let us know your experiences and how we might be able to support you more as you've gone through those multitude of events in 2017. All right, so let's continue on. I want to take a moment and kind of give you my story perspective. A lot of times when we talk about WebGIS, we talk about it from the GIS practitioner, from the the public safety operator perspective. And I just want to take a step back, and I live in the Houston metro area personally. My wife and I live on the north side of Houston, and so I want to tell you my story about Harvey and from a citizen's perspective. So I wasn't supporting any disaster-related activities at the local level, and I wasn't supporting at that time Esri's Disaster Response Program. I was actually impacted by the storm minimally. So I would say we were lucky on the fact that on the north side of town where we live, we had the less of the rain. So we had about 26 inches of rain here at our house. Down on the west and south sides of Houston, as you guys know, that almost 52 inches of rain fell across the area. And as I was kind of monitoring this, we were watching both tornado warnings that were coming and being issued for us here at the house. We were worried about pine trees for us as the soil became more saturated, falling down and losing power. And so a lot of us were, as you can imagine, glued to the TV and to the web, using our phones to kind of text each other around the area. So we have a lot of friends and family here in the Houston Metroplex. So we're all kind of keeping in touch and seeing how they were being impacted. And as the screenshot I put up here from one of the news stations was a good example of what most of us as citizens get to interact with on a day-to-day basis. A lot of text, a lot of descriptors, and things that people that don't necessarily think geographically and don't really even know a certain part of the town may not be able to relate to. And so you'll see here just the rolling updates, update at 4:40 a.m. Friday to 10 a.m. Friday. And a lot of these are mandatory evacuation notices that were going out for sections of neighborhoods, so not entire neighborhoods, but sections of neighborhoods, parts of the community, certain roads that were being evacuated, so they weren't even evacuating entire neighborhoods. And you can imagine, so even me being a geographer and knowing Houston Metroplex pretty well, it was really hard for me to get context. And the scary part about this was that my best friends live on the west side of town, and so they are near the Addicks and Barker reservoirs that you've probably heard about in the news. And so they were monitoring that, but more importantly, she has a brother-in-law that lives along the Brazos River, so that's down in Fort Bend County, and the Brazos River was close to topping over a couple levees, and her family had evacuated out, and her brother-in-law was staying behind to get the last little bit out and try to get out of the neighborhood before they shut down. And so that story was really common, and she was reaching out to me asking, based on these text alerts that were coming in and these updates on the news, was he close to the river? He knew he was close, right? So should he be evacuated? Was it mandatory or not? And so forth. And so we were really trying to help provide some context through text and everything else to just give her updates as much as we could, being outside of the major impact. And then as the event kind of unfolded, suddenly I'm watching TV and this map shows up, right? So this map is from Fort Bend County Emergency Management, an amazing map when you look at it here, mandatory and voluntary evacuations. And this happens to be almost directly on the neighborhood where her brother was posted. And so the Brazos River is that line that you see running in the southwest part of the map, or the lower left corner of the graphic. So that's the evacuation along the Brazos River. And then those neighborhoods are being evacuated up in the kind of center part of the map. So immediately now, this is something I took a picture of. So this is literally me standing in the living room. I took a picture of this. I texted it directly to her and said, go to the website here. You'll see it at the top. This is a way you can start to get real intelligence about where the evacuations are in relation to the address that she knew for her brother-in-law. So this is WebGIS, right? This ability to take the text-based data to provide geographic context, put it into a map that can be picked up by the media and scaled dramatically with the number of hits they were receiving on this map is something that we want to talk about today. So my personal story is that WebGIS as a citizen makes a huge difference. I know that for many of you that service communities and your organization, the request for information just always, it just exponentially gets more as you go through an event. And so we're going to talk today about how WebGIS can help not only with just public communication like this, but also inside of your organization, how you can support those workflows for things like damage assessment and debris management when the time comes. So then let me switch hats a bit and put that in context. Here at Esri, our disaster response program is there to provide software support, data, and really just connect organizations together in time of need. So when local communities, expertise, or technology is exceeded, that's where we're able to help out. And so if you're ever in need of something, just know you can always go to esri.com/disaster, make a request for assistance through us. We'll respond 24/7. Or just shoot us an email, disaster_help. That is monitored 24/7 as well. And this website you see up right now, we are activated currently, still supporting the wildfires. in the West, and we still have some ongoing activities in the Caribbean and likewise for hurricanes as they go into recovery efforts longer term. And so today what we'd like to talk about is, how this pattern of WebGIS supports all aspects of emergency management, specifically talking about how you can be ready for the next response. And I want to give you another simple example here, I think, of the power of WebGIS. So one of those was my take on it from a citizen side, and this is more of an internal one, and I specifically picked this one as a public works department because, as organizations and as GIS staff in emergency management, we are coordinators of a lot of activities of all departments in government, making sure that resources are applied to different missions and the support functions that they get called into. And this was the city of Miami post Hurricane Irma doing a debris assessment, right? So they were actually going out and showing where roads were closed with trees, where piles of debris were located. And the map you see on the bottom left was actually the way this started, was a paper product, which is pretty common, and they were using pen and paper to basically mark X's where things were closed, check marks where things were open, and then trying to aggregate all that back in to a database to get sense of the level of need around debris removal and just make sure the community was able to move again post Hurricane Irma. And so we got a call from Wade Sanders, who's Miami Public Works Assistant Director for Maintenance Operations. And you see the quote up on the screen, but essentially what Wade asked is like, look, we are using pen and paper. There's a lot more information out there that we need to collect today, and it feels like we're getting it tomorrow, right? We are always behind the curve. There's just so much work to be done. And so using WebGIS together with his team and the Esri Disaster Response Program, we were to kind of launch some of these quick apps you're going to learn about today, literally in less than a day. We're talking a matter of hours, be able to get his staff up and running, as you see in the middle, on mobile devices, taking pictures, filling out the form to give Wade on the right-hand side of the bottom situation awareness and intelligence about where those debris piles are located, what streets were still closed and need to be assessed or sent resources to first. So that pattern of going from paper maps to a simple app in the middle in a matter of hours and getting operational intelligence to make data-driven decisions on the right is what WebGIS is all about. And so that simple story there is another repeatable pattern that we want you to take away from today. So welcome to WebGIS. This is the new modern GIS approach. It allows us to do a couple of things really quick. So number one, it allows us to support those common workflows that we do in public safety and emergency management day in and day out with really focused applications. But more importantly, as we all know what happens during a disaster, it also helps us support those uncommon workflows, those things that we just didn't anticipate in advance or we weren't quite ready for, but we need to launch something fast, like that damage assessment or that debris reporting app that we just talked about from Miami. Those things that pop up, we want to give you the knowledge of how to answer the call to that challenge really quickly with with WebGIS as a pattern. And the second part is we want to make sure that WebGIS, it allows you to make sure that any of those mission critical apps, the things that cannot fail, can actually scale. And you see on the right-hand side a tweet that came out of the state of Florida from Richard Bucktright up there, and he said, hey, they wanted to know their zone. This was the Know Your Zone evacuation area that people could type in an address in the state of Florida as Hurricane Irma was bearing down and say, what zone am I in, and should I evacuate or not? And so you see that number there. It's almost 28 million map requests peak on September 9th. That scales, right? So that's what we want to make sure that you know how to set up your data and your applications to support that type of load if it ever gets to that level. The Fort Bend County example on the other side for Hurricane Harvey in my backyard was the same way, right? So we're going to teach you those patterns. And WebGIS is also really important because it allows us to combine not only the real-time data that we often need, so real-time traffic and information from sources like Waze and others, with our business data coming in from systems like WebEOC and others to really provide better situational awareness and make that data-driven decision much more possible for the operators and chiefs that are out there. And we're going to talk about how WebGIS enables users both within and outside the organization. So many of you support users inside, but you also want to kind of tap into the crowd, so to speak, for photos and damage assessment and all sorts of workflows. And we'll talk about how that extends outward. And then ultimately how you can foster information sharing and collaboration more quickly. With WebGIS allows you to share both internally, securely externally, as well as openly externally when needed, so that you get the data in the right hands of decision makers or users, whether that be the public or other organizations or entities. So that's WebGIS, right? That's the value of WebGIS for us. And I've tried to highlight a couple of use cases for it. All right, so let me go a level down. So I want to make sure that many of you say, okay, I get WebGIS as a name, but what does it really look like? What are we talking about here? And I just want to break it down into 3 basic elements for us, and we're going to talk about each one of these today. So number 1, WebGIS is really about an application or multiple applications that support a user requirement, whether that's the citizen public information map that I showed for Fort Bend County, or it's the public works official monitoring a dashboard, or it's the public works person in the field actually doing a debris assessment on a mobile device. Those applications are really the user experience that take advantage of this whole WebGIS environment and gives the end user tools inside of that application to answer specific questions based on whatever that mission or requirement is. So that's number 1, is just an application. Number 2 is that application relies on what we call a web map. Now that web map inside is a way that you can start to organize your data, both that operational and real-time data that coming in from things like Waze, or from here for traffic data that we'll talk about, or real-time weather layers and overlay for events and sensors like stream gauges and the like, along with your internal data sets from your GIS system of record. So whether that's streets or parcels and the like, the data that you're collecting internally and managing on a day-to-day basis is a part of that. And then finally, the bottom layer of that web map is really about the digital base maps that provide context, and that's through imagery or for streets. So by layering those data sets together into a web map, we can then publish applications, and multiple applications that take advantage of that web map, again, that are mission or purpose specific to that end user's need. So that's WebGIS at a high level, the basic elements today. I want to talk for a second about the data side of this below, because I think this is where WebGIS becomes transformational inside of our organizations. So we're talking about data not only from your GIS traditional databases, right? The data that you manage in geodatabases and like, but we're also talking about how WebGIS starts to overlay and allow you to connect with other authoritative sources of information. So we're not talking about replacing and pulling data out of systems. We're talking about using WebGIS to open up these other systems and using geography as a common language, right? The location of where on top of the map all these features in various business systems begin to overlay. That's the power of what we're talking about for WebGIS. So whether that's imagery that you've got coming in post-event, it's LiDAR data that you've flown and you want to be able to do feature extraction or look at modeling around that, or it's real-time data from sensor networks and local sensors like stream gauges, or phones even is considering kind of a sensor. Those things begin to overlay and plug in. And so once you've done that, once we've connected those systems together and we've prioritized where to begin, that web map then again turns on and allows us to support every mission inside the organization. And I know this seems complex, and so we're going to try to simplify the workflow and give you the starting points for applications that you can pick from, so you have a baseline ready to go today to be WebGIS ready. So we're going to talk a little bit about field teams and how mobile devices can help in that regard. You'll see some ideas of web maps being used in other things like dashboards and examples that might support section chiefs, for example, or elected officials. And we'll talk about the public and citizens and how we can start to push information out to them with public information maps that can scale and the like. So WebGIS is about connecting all these data points together, enabling workflows, and giving you a selection of applications that become much more purpose-driven for those end users. All right, so let's pause for a moment. I'd like to ask another question here just to get a sense of where you are with WebGIS. And I hear this a lot, that there's challenges for WebGIS, and part of today is about awareness. So just making sure we kind of baseline what WebGIS means for us. But I'm curious to see, for your perspective, for those of you that are using ArcGIS and you're thinking about WebGIS, what were some of the biggest challenges? If you've already implemented, that's great. I just want to know maybe some of the challenges you face, and if you're currently in the process of shifting your approach to more of a WebGIS approach, what are some of the challenges you've got for that implementation? That could be awareness of just what WebGIS is and the value it plays. It could be that you need more training of how to implement these solutions and the applications that we're going to talk about today. A lot of times we hear it's time, right? I know if you're a GIS practitioner working in a city or county, you've got day-to-day business of managing everything from addresses to center lines and parcels and everything else. So how do you make the shift to make time to start to implement WebGIS? And it could be executive support. So maybe it's just you need to have some awareness at an executive level to support the ability to push applications externally and start to really scale in the web environment, or something else. So just let us know. Take a moment to select one of those, and then we'll see where we land before we move forward. So take a moment, please, and select any or all that apply here to you on the screen. All right, let's take a look at the results. All right, so awareness and training, good. So I hope that today starts to give you a little bit of that awareness of what WebGIS means when you hear the term for us, and I hope that today's training is the first step to getting you into WebGIS. Our goal at the end of the day will be to provide you with some additional resources, both to figure out where you find applications and how to deploy those, and then also just the general nature of WebGIS and training on that side. And I get the time, so I've worked in state and local government for time, and I know the time commitment that it takes. So part of what I want to convey today in today's WebGIS intro is that this doesn't take a lot of time in terms of launching these applications. It does take time on the preparedness side, and that's what we're going to really focus on today to kind of help you develop a plan of action going forward so that when the time comes to launch these things, you'll be ready. In executive support, I've been on that side too of advocating internally to executive level, and then also been on the end of the executive level being advocated to about the value of WebGIS. And so we can talk more about that as we go, and I would love to, we'll provide some email address at the bottom when we get done today, but if you have specific questions, we won't touch a ton on that today for executive support. Part of what we want to arm you with for those that are having that conversation is some of the things and the value add that this can bring to you and some of the business requirements that this can address inside of an organization to hopefully help you have a better conversation at that level. But we're here to support that. So if you want to ask us questions after today about how to engage in that conversation, let us know. I'm happy to jump on a call and discuss. All right, so let's move on to the next section here. So thanks for taking the time to give us a sense of where you are today. Give the poll just a second to close out. All right, looks like we've got a hung poll for just a second. Sorry about the delay as we kind of get this moving here. Give us just 1 second to make sure that the poll is done. Or we may just get to take the poll again for the second time around for anybody that's interested.
Sorry, Ryan, we're having difficulties closing it.
That's okay. The joys of technology, yeah.
Right. Ray, are you able to close it on your side? It doesn't give me the close option. Well.
All right, sorry everybody for the delay here on the side. So we will get this addressed and we'll get into the next part of showing WebGIS.
Let me throw it, I'm going to change the presenter just 1 second. Hold on, folks.
Okay, thanks, Brenda. So kudos to our back-end advocate, Brenda Martinez on the team, who is always tirelessly working behind the scenes to make these things work and function.
There we go.
Excellent, thank you, Brenda. All right, so let's pick back up where we're talking about. So let's transition a bit. So that's hopefully the intro to WebGIS. Again, to this, what we're going to cover now are the series of steps for WebGIS readiness. So I'm going to turn over to Jeff Barani. We're going to talk about how you collect and connect with data, what that looks like. Again, focus on mobile workforce, how we can start to begin to really enable those processes for damage assessment, debris removal. We'll give you a list of how you pick and start the right app for the workflow, and ultimately configure all these things for mission critical apps so that they scale and support the growth that you're going to need. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff Barani. And Jeff, thanks for taking over.
Great. Thanks, Ryan, and good morning, everyone. As Ryan mentioned, the first thing we want to kind of start is looking at from a data perspective. And for the 31% of you that haven't had a disaster recently, just wanted to share that there's a lot of information and data and live feeds that you can leverage very quickly with inside your application. So there's a series of live feeds that are available from our Living Atlas collection with inside ArcGIS Online that you can choose from to help configure and provide for situational awareness applications and briefing applications, not only for your decision makers, your emergency operations centers, but also information that you can share with the public as well. Many of these data sets come from a variety of different sources between NOAA, USGS, and others for live updated content that you could bring in, add to your map to really quickly, start to bring together information from a situation awareness perspective. So data really helps fuel the applications that Power of WebGIS, as Ryan mentioned, and we have a quick way to help you bring in many live feeds of information to your web map to get ready to go to be able to monitor events as they unfold and help you understand if activation may be required. So just a couple of key data sets that are out there and available for a variety of different disasters. As the events of the hurricanes unfolded over the past couple of months, we shared many of these kind of key sources with you, not only the live feeds of hurricanes, preset forecasts, but the wealth of information that NOAA made available for the hurricanes as well, such as potential storm surge flooding, some of the national water model data to show forecasts of streams. So over the past couple months from the hurricane response, a great set of data that was out there available right away to provide a great starting point for applications. But it's also about data. What are some of the other business systems within inside your organization that you would need to connect to start to bring in other details to help maintain, situation awareness and about what's going on? So, for example, here we're looking at a operations dashboard view of this shelter status in Puerto Rico. This is a recent screenshot connected live into their WebEOC system. So this is just an example of starting to operationalize some of those systems to be able to provide additional sources for situation awareness purposes. From a business system perspective, it's really kind of all about taking that system of record, so in this case the WebEOC board of shelter status, and essentially turn that into a GIS layer or feature service in this case to be able to get off and running with quickly, kind of make this a first-class citizen from a GIS perspective, to be able to configure with inside your web maps as well as your applications for a variety of different purposes. Another example of operationalizing data is something that was done with the Waze data through the GeoEvent server via connector that connects to the Waze Connected Citizen program. So there's a connector for GeoEvents that basically operationalizes the data coming out of the Waze applications and allows that to be brought into a map very quickly. So this is something that we helped spurn for the recent events for, in this case, Irma we're looking at here with the state of Florida, also did this for the hurricanes and Harvey. And really quickly now being able to leverage that information from the crowd, from the Waze users, and provide that as an additional source of information to give intelligence on the status of road conditions, where roads may be closed, where there may be debris on the road, where things may be impassable, as reported by Waze users. And all of this is time enabled. So in this example, as we play back the events over time, we can see where the concentration of Waze jams were the highest. In this case, as the Hurricane Irma was approaching, and as citizens were moving away from the coast from the west coast in Florida here. So this is just another example here of operationalizing data. And as Ryan mentioned, this is much of the hard work that needs to be done from kind of a preparedness perspective. And I like to think of it as kind of doing the plumbing work to make the data flow. And wherever that data may exist. Where these systems of record that are important for decision-making purposes may be. At a local level, maybe it's public works information or transportation ITS systems. What are the different kind of business systems within inside your organization that you need to think about from a preparedness perspective to be ready, connected, and ready to go when and if disaster strikes? And so these are good, important things to think about. These are good conversations to have with decision makers, executives, about what are the types of layers or business systems they'd want to see on a map from a situational awareness perspective as disaster strikes. So just a couple of quick initial thoughts here to share with you from a data perspective on some of the key elements in terms of starting to operationalize data and making that available more broadly. Certainly one key trend that we saw and was reinforced during the recent events of not only the hurricanes but the recent wildfires is the importance of engaging and managing your mobile workforce, and really, in my mind, kind of empowering them and deputizing them as GIS staff to help go out and collect data in the field, whatever the kind of mission may be. So obviously damage assessment is kind of one key area, and we heard many success stories from users on how they're able to leverage either Collector or Survey 123 to go out and inventory a damaged area really quickly, whether that's 90,000 structures that were inventoried in a particular county in Georgia, for example, or many different stories along those lines. And really the workflow is taking some sort of kind of traditional kind of paper form, in this case perhaps damage assessment, standard individual assistance or public assistance type of forms, translating that into a digital environment, and then empowering the field staff to go out to be able to survey the damage, collect information, and bring that in really quickly. Not only is that the kind of the textual elements of the form, additionally photos from the field, different sides of the houses can be displayed here, as you see in the screenshot, and brought back into a viewer for situation awareness purposes, as well as the location, and bring all of that in really quickly. This time and time again, we see this reinforced as a much more efficient way of collecting information from the field over some sort of paper form. So damage assessment is kind of one kind of key area where we see this used. One kind of evolving trend that we saw during the recent events with the hurricanes is a large desire by many of the urban search and rescue teams, many of the task force that went out, to collect information on their search and rescue work and report that back in new ways. So there was an initiative that the International Association of Fire Chiefs, or IFC, took on during the course of the recent events to be able to empower these search and rescue teams with mobile technology, in this case Survey 123, to go out and kind of inventory the work that was done, monitor where rescues were made, where homes were inventoried, and be able to collect this information in real time and be able to send that back really quickly, so you could have kind of a command view, as you see here on this operations dashboard on the left. So really agile uses of the technology to help us adjust on the fly to support additional mission needs as they kind of come across and come to fruition inside of these events. And so this is a program that IFC is kind of taking further, that not only were we able to characterize the search and rescue information and the types of data that was collected there, but also being able to shift for other types of things that they'd want to inventory in the field, like hazards, whether there's a fuel depot or something like that, maybe some sort of additional hazard that they'd want to inventory in the field. We heard many success stories like this, of people being able to leverage the technology really quickly to adjust to different mission needs and provide tools and apps to support a variety of different missions from a field perspective. So as you think about moving forward from a preparedness perspective, a couple of resources for you to keep in mind. We have an existing damage assessment solution template today. That's something you can leverage for more information on the the search and rescue work. We have a contact here, Chief Jeff Doolin, and we'll provide these links to you in the email after the event. Hot off the press, FEMA's work to kind of standardize damage assessment forms for Survey 123 are now available. You need to contact your FEMA regional representative or email the address here. And additionally, we've done a previous webinar specifically on mobile data collection. So if you want to learn more, that's another good resource for you to be able to find the latest, tips and tricks and techniques in the variety of different apps. So this may just be kind of a teaser for you to help you understand some of the capabilities and tools that may be out there and available, and certainly more resources to explore. Now, in terms of thinking about some of the key missions or workflows that you may want to build additional capabilities for, configure additional capabilities for in your jurisdiction, one of the key areas where we wanted to start is thinking about things from a situation awareness perspective. So here what we're looking at is a configuration of the web app builder template, application with the situation awareness widgets inside it. These are some of our solution templates that basically allow us to bring in all those live feeds of information. And so here's a screenshot as Harvey approached the coast of Texas, and we're able to use the storm surge warning zones, as you see there indicated in the info summary widget, and use that as kind of input to start to ask, what's in this potentially, impacted area? What types of, critical infrastructure like hospitals, fire stations, schools, etc., would be in this impacted area, in this case, the storm surge warning zones. And here we can see that at the time that this alert was, issued, this forecast was issued, as the storm approached, there were 6 hospitals that were kind of conveying were in the storm surge, warning area. So, these tools, the application, this particular application here is really powerful to help kind of answer the who's impacted and what's impacted type of questions that your operations staff, your decision makers would want to know, and can be able to help provide answers to you very quickly, not only in a graphical form here and being able to show this information on a map, but also these tools provide the ability to create reports with this information or export the results as well. So really powerful capabilities for you to explore and leverage here. And here's another example of from a situation awareness perspective, being able to take spreadsheets of information here like power outage information and put this into a map form really quickly. So this was telling the story of the power outage situation as after Hurricane Irma struck Florida here, and we can see as updates were made to that spreadsheet of that data that was operationalized, that's reflected here in the map and in an easily to understand way and showing the kind of current status of information. So in this case, a more kind of mission specific view from kind of a power outage, perspective from situation awareness. Or another different picture here from the transportation status. Here, another screenshot from the state of Florida and the great work that they did to integrate, data from a variety of different systems. The Department of Transportation that had many data sets, well operationalized, that can be brought in here to this view, combine that with other information like live feeds or live alerts from ways to give this view from the transportation status, what the current picture of the situation was from a situational awareness perspective. Again, kind of moving on from the different kind of mission specific themes, looking at the operations dashboard, and this was a screenshot that was taken that incorporated not only those live feeds of information that we talked about there in the beginning, but also that FEMA has a feed of shelter status that were simply configured here. This is a public feed, and was showing the current shelters, current population in shelters at one particular point in time during the event. So again, thinking about using these tools, in this case the operations dashboard, to bring in different data sets to be able to show some of the reporting information there on the left, configuring the widgets to portray different mission specific views with the apps that come along with from a WebGIS perspective. Another example is being able to empower elected officials to brief using these tools as well. In this case, a screenshot again of the situation awareness viewer that was being leveraged by the state of Texas to help brief elected officials at the highest level on the current situation. So very kind of powerful uses of the technology. A couple of resources to leave you with from a situation awareness perspective included a couple of the different templates: the situation awareness viewer, as we mentioned, incident status dashboard to show different views, and then highlighting again that there's a more detailed webinar that's been recorded and available to you on using a variety of the different tools for situation awareness purposes if you want to learn more. The next workflow that we want to talk about here is looking at things from a briefing perspective. Obviously this is either at an incident or with in your command center at a local, state, or even private perspective. But briefings will go on with events like these. One great example is the FEMA's kind of standing public Hurricane Story Map Journal, and how this was updated with information from live feeds, some of their business systems, as the events kind of unfold. So this is a great kind of example use of the technology from a briefing perspective to not only with inside your command center, but to share more broadly with partners as events unfold. There was a couple of public examples that we put together, kind of inventorying not only kind of ready to use apps, but also data sets that are out there and available to help kind of tell the story. So we can share some of these example links with you after the webcast. But what I want to emphasize from a workflow perspective is the real power and the real value that we saw from many of the users in the community as they were responding to these events was configuring these applications for briefing perspective along different thematic lines, whether that be emergency support functions like transportation, shelter status, mass care, that type of thing, and being able to provide really quick, simple to use applications that people could advance and show in real time to get different information on different aspects of the response. And in many emergency operations centers, as a briefing's going on, you may have had PowerPoint on one side and live maps on the left as briefings unfold to give a current dynamic view into the situation and be able to quickly keep up with the briefings with these live views of information. If there's a particular question, folks could drill into the map, get more details, change the display, much more interactive than a static PowerPoint. So again, this was another pattern that we saw during the course of the events that resonated very well with the user community and executives and decision makers, was bringing together a lot of different information very quickly and easy to use applications like this from a briefing perspective. A couple of additional resources here to share with you to get started. There's a solution template for briefings, as well as a recent webinar that we've done on using some of these tools to communicate more effectively. Public information, another kind of key area. As we know, as Ryan kind of talked about in the beginning, sharing his story, the public is looking for situation awareness information just as much as those in the emergency operations center or from an elected official perspective. Not only the evacuation map from Fort Bend County, as Ryan mentioned, is certainly a trend that we saw, but we saw many great uses of the Know Your Zone type of application through the course of many of these different events. These were things that were probably stood up, well advance of the events, and all of a sudden when these events struck, we saw just unreal usage numbers. 28 million hits for the state of Florida's hurricane evacuation map in one day, as you see there in the bottom right. And that's really the power of WebGIS, is to be able to stand up to those large loads and be able to handle the volume of requests that you'll be coming in from the public. And we again, great uses of the technology and different examples for you to think about in your own jurisdiction, how you might be better prepared for the next event with WebGIS. Another example that I wanted to share from the recent wildfires in northern California. Obviously, a tragic amount of lives lost and structures lost in those events, and in this case, here's an example map from that CAL FIRE provided, showing that the damaged structures in a public map, and being able to convey this information. So we know this is critical information that the public, the media will be interested in, and again, the patterns of WebGIS to help us configure these applications can help these stand up to the load, as people are looking for this critical information that you as GIS professionals can help empower using some of these patterns and techniques. A couple of resources to share with you here, the My Hazard Information type of example to help you with those know your zone type of apps, and then additional best practices are shared in a recent webinar that we recorded previously that some of you may attended. Obviously many of these examples that we have shared kind of so far are things from a preparedness perspective. What are things to kind of consider for the next event? Obviously, really from a response perspective. And some of you that may be attending today still may be in recovery mode, and there's different applications and configurations of WebGIS you may be looking for from a recovery perspective. Debris reporting is just one example. So we had the City of Key West share with us recently how they leveraged the debris reporting template to show and kind of inventory the results of folks in the field, showing where there was still, debris on the road, or, boats washed ashore, or appliances, left out. Using this as a quick way to inventory the kind of status from a debris perspective, so that can be communicated, back in a central location, and then prioritized for cleanup to help kind of expedite the response and recovery. So many different kind of uses from the response, from the recovery perspective as well, not only from debris reporting, but communicating, re-entry status, or looking at the results of damage assessment to prioritize, kind of recovery activities. So, although here we wanted to, in this webinar, wanted to focus mostly from kind of a preparedness perspective, also wanted to note that there's additional uses as well from a recovery perspective that are important for many. So as Ryan mentioned, we learn a lot from these events. We learn a lot about the different kind of patterns of use, but we also learn how the technology could be improved, and share that with our development staff. So many improvements have been made in the software over the years to accommodate the needs of the workflows of this community, the public safety and emergency management community. And so one kind of best practice from a mission critical application that we wanted to share is for data that doesn't change very frequently, like these evacuation zones. Consider using a tile layer for this information. This kind of technique will help you stand up to these high volume types of requests and provide this information, 28 million maps a day, as we heard example from the stats. And a tile layer is a great way to provide for and help your application stand up to the load. It obviously it cuts, the browser doesn't have to draw complex requests. These things can be drawn, very quickly. Pop-ups can still be enabled from these layers. In terms of configuring, in preparing this information, the tile layers can be generated on the desktop, either with ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro, and then published to ArcGIS Online to help ensure and save, credits. Another kind of key best practice workflow for mission critical applications, especially for those that you share with the public, is to use views for for data that changes dynamically, whether that's a damage assessment or inspections, or other data that may be collected in the field. If you want to share that, either more broadly within your organization or with the public, views are an important way to allow for a high volume access to the data that may be changing quickly. So essentially, just like SQL Server views, you can have a view for the public that's read only, and you can certainly limit the fields that are shown there, and then a view of the source data that's editable to the field collectors in the kind of a restricted access perspective that's only made available for those that are collecting the data. So that's another improvement that's been added to the technology over the past year to help with these kind of mission critical key situations. So a key way that this is created now to create views, there's simply in the item details page of the feature service, there's a create view button that allows you to essentially create a different view of the data that is shared, that potentially could be shared at a different level, in this case with the public, as opposed to just a single group now. And then we can change the way that particular view of the data is defined, whether that's limiting through a kind of query definition type of way of the data that you want to show, or only showing a particular set of fields that you want to make available to the public more broadly, if you've got those feature functions available to you there, to be able to limit data. So that's a recent addition over the past year or so that we really wanted to emphasize as a best practice for ensuring that your applications can stand up to the loads when your citizens, when your constituents need to get access, to this data. One final tip from a performance perspective, and something that's been added in a recent release is clustering. So clustering is another kind of cartographic technique to help improve performance, especially when you have a large number of features. So in this case, in the example of damage assessment in Puerto Rico, and in this case using clustering to show the 90,000 or so structures that are in this particular service in a more efficient and kind of quick way, especially since it's dynamic and updated and changing. This is another tool or technique that is worth exploring to help ensure that your application can stand up with the load, when needed. So we've shown you many things kind of from a slide perspective in terms of some of the best practices, some of the mission critical, applications here, and I want to show in demo form a couple of these things, really quickly. So first, just to reemphasize from a data perspective that, with inside the Living Atlas, with inside the Earth observations group here with inside the Living Atlas, there's many data sets that we can add to our map quickly for a variety of different disaster types to help us provide for situation awareness information, not only domestically but also some data sets available kind of internationally. So with just a couple of quick clicks, we're able to bring in a lot of data and information for our jurisdiction from a situation awareness perspective. As we mentioned, from a briefing perspective, being able to look at different views of information here in a story map. In this case, from the data catalog view, we're simply clicking through the different themes of information that are brought together within inside this operations dashboard. Obviously, in this case, the power outage situation is mostly resolved in the state of Florida. If we look at things from a transportation theme, we can bring up the view of information from that perspective and see how things have returned to normal. In this case, it's a set of briefing applications that bring together many different data sets or applications here that allow you to essentially have an app of apps, if you will, and bring together the different situation awareness views of information and bring that together here in real time from a briefing perspective. In the interest of time, I'll just stop with this last example here. Again, the public information map here for the structure status in Sonoma County, as we're able to zoom in here, in a real performant way, and to unfortunately explore the devastation, to this area. But in the interest of time, I'll kind of end the demonstrations, here, and then I think turn it back over to you, Ryan, to ask our last and final, poll question, and to finish us out here for the end of our webinar.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the run through there. So, Jeff illustrated a bunch of different workflows, from situation awareness to damage assessment, how to do briefings, and even public information that all rely on WebGIS, right? How do we configure data into the web map? How do we put that web map into the appropriate application that supports each one of those workflows? And so I'm just kind of curious, after you've seen a few of those things, and maybe for those of you that have been through those events recently this year, as you answered early on, which of those do you find will be most useful for your agency? And we're just kind of curious because that will help us figure out where we can provide additional training and outreach on so that you guys know how to use and take advantage of the app. So please feel free to select all that apply. All are great. One is just as great. So take a moment, please, and select all of those that you find will be most useful for your agency. Situation awareness, the briefings, doing damage assessment in a mobile app, public information, or debris reporting, as we showed as well. So take a moment, please, and select. All right, so let's take a look at the results of the poll. All right, so situation awareness, that's a really common request that we get, 81%. I think hopefully Jeff illustrated the ability to take the live feeds, and for those that use WebEOC as well on the backside, the bi-directional push now between WebEOC and ArcGIS Online and the web map is possible. We can talk much more about that and help you if you have questions in that regard. Briefings, number 2 or 3 it looks like, and then damage assessment is number 2. So damage assessment is one of the most common requests that we get from the disaster response program, is how to quickly stand up a mobile application to support that. And that I think the benefit, as we just described to WebGIS, is that same kind of environment to WebGIS and using mobile apps that support damage assessment can easily pivot for those of you that have debris reporting on the list, right? So the same application, right, the same environment, we're just changing out the data in the web map and making sure that the focus of that from a form collection part aligns to the right reporting metrics and data elements needed. So that's kind of the benefit we wanted to show, is that you can move between a few of these. So for those in the mobile environment for damage assessment, you're teed up to be able to do debris reporting. For those that do situation awareness, you've probably got a lot of the elements to then move into the briefing environment and select a different app to display those things as well. So thanks for taking the time. We'll use that to kind of help us craft further training and information as we move on. So with that, let me move to the kind of the end here, some next steps. So what can you do after leaving today? So number 1 is that we do have a lot of examples, a lot of information and guidance on the emergency management industry page, which you see URL at the top. And all the solution templates that Jeff highlighted, so the damage assessment, the debris reporting, the briefing, incident briefings, and so forth, are located on the solutions page, solutions.arcgis.com. Those are free downloadable templates that sit on top of ArcGIS as a platform and allow you to quickly deploy these applications, as we've talked about today. And we also mentioned, if you need help, right, you need support during a disaster and you remember something that you saw here, but you haven't gotten to the chance of deploying that yet, feel free to reach out to us when you need help. So esri.com/disaster. That's also a great place to see how others are responding. So we have a lot of best practices, a lot of use cases and examples of these applications supporting the wildfires currently, as well as the trio of hurricanes that we had affecting the Caribbean into the US as well, and the 48. And then questions and ideas. So if you have questions, please just go ahead and chat those in the window. We'll take a moment to answer as many as we can. I know we're running short on time today, so we will follow up for anybody that enters a question. But feel free to do that through the chat window. If you have ideas or suggestions or further questions, so I mentioned some of those opportunities early on. If you're trying to engage executives, you want to brainstorm around how you can deploy WebGIS or how to configure your environment with our solution templates, feel free to reach out. So my email address is rlencloss@esri.com. Jeff is jbarani@esri.com. And you can also find us on Twitter. You'll find all sorts of good tidbits and announcements that we're doing across the board at GS Public Safety, and anything that we activate for the disaster response at Esri DRP. So those are 2 good ones to follow, just to kind of stay current on where technology is headed, what we're doing in terms of events and webinars in the future with that. And then our next webinar. So this series will not end going, this is our last one for 2017, but we will see you again in 2018, starting in January for the emergency management series, as well as our other team members, so law enforcement, fire, and our emergency call taking and dispatch will also continue into 2018. So look for some emails and invitations as we begin to plan that out for 2018. And we'll definitely use your feedback from these events today and throughout the year to kind of craft that going forward. So let's take a few questions here before we break off today on the side. So let me look through the list really quick. So Jeff, I've got a question for you that came through, which is, are there any, like, going back to the executive engagement idea and conversations, is there any advice that you can give to a GIS professional to help invest in WebGIS and have that conversation of how to get the agency moving forward and investing in GIS more? Any advice for them?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. Yeah, a couple of thoughts there. I mean, one, I think, just trying to have conversations with decision makers, maybe configure one of these apps, quickly, try and have a conversation with that decision maker about, what he or she'd like to see more, what do they think of it. And I in many cases, in our experience, we see that kind of spurns additional conversation and additional ideas of how this may be used. And another thought for many of you is how can you get engaged with exercises that are going on in your jurisdiction, either at a local or state, level. And we often find that, exercises are, good kind of time to share, potentials of what these applications might be able to do. And in a consequence environment, you'll be able to see and kind of get feedback on how these may be used and really kind of expose others in your organization on some of the capabilities that the WebGIS provides. So just a couple of quick thoughts there, Ryan, on that question.
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Jeff. And then we have kind of a technical one, which is, we showed a few of the different applications, especially on the mobile side, for those of you selected debris and damage assessment as two of the major workflows that you're interested in. So we showed two different apps, Survey 123 as one of the applications on top of ArcGIS, and the other was Collector for ArcGIS. So Jeff, could you maybe quickly just compare Survey 123 and Collector and when you might want to use one over the other in those workflows?
Yeah, so we definitely see, Survey 123 is a great way when there's kind of more kind of complex forms or more kind of logic that you want to add to your questions. We're really kind of more of a form-driven approach. If there's kind of conditional, questions, almost kind of choose your own adventure, type of thing. And we definitely saw that was able to be leveraged, really quickly, during the course of these, kind of recent events. I think Collector's been around for some time as more of a map-focused way, map-centric way of collecting information, not only points like Survey 123 does, but also lines and polygons as well, and allows you to quickly, collect that, information. So both are, great applications. Both support offline use, so if you have no internet connectivity, but it's kind of in my mind, a form-centric approach versus a kind of map or GIS-centric approach for collecting data.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think that's a great way to summarize. So think about the end user as the other case, and then what the data collection need is, right? So lines and polygons kind of go into the collector world. If it's points and you want a little more of a form-driven centric place, and skip logic to kind of take away some of the extraneous fields that may be inappropriate based on the flow of the form, go to Survey 123, and both take advantage of the WebGIS and WebMap environment to do that. And can you also on the backside connect into those operations dashboards, as Jeff showed, for kind of the assessment, kind of monitoring and evaluation and making sure that where you're at. So thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. All right, so it looks like that's all the questions we have for today. So I just want to take a moment and say thank you for all of you that attended today. Thanks for those of you who have been with us for all of 2017, and we look forward to going into 2018 and our next event. So stay tuned for invitations to join us in January of 2018. If you have further questions, feel free to email at any point. We'd love to dig in and help you out. So thanks again, and have a great rest of the day.